Hey, what's up, everybody? Greetings, mateys. Be sure to hit subscribe so you can tune in for every adventure here on the VHS Pirate Ship. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy the show. Greetings, mateys. It's me, Captain Otto, and welcome aboard me VHS Pirate Ship. It's the VHS Pirate Ship. Pirate Ship! And I'm really excited about today's adventure because we're talking about one of my personal heroes, Ernest P. Worrell. It's Exploring Ernest Tapes, Part 1. Because when you do a show about Jim Varney, it's so much fun. You can't have just one. So enjoy the show. Yarr! I'm going to start off today's show a little off topic, but also on topic, so just follow me here, okay? The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a team of heroes comprised of literary figures, much like the Avengers is comprised of superheroes. It's like an all-star team. Okay, so you take the concept of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but instead of literary figures, you comprise it of 80s comedic icons. Who would you include on that roster? Pee Wee Herman, Weird Al Yankovic, maybe Mr. Bean. I know that didn't come out till 1990, but close enough. And you would certainly have to include Ernest P. Worrell. And speaking of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I thought everyone was way too hard on that movie. It was ahead of its time. It was a superhero collaboration film that came out years before the Avengers or the Justice League movies. I know it's not like the comic book, but what is? It's a film adaptation. Give me a break. And I know it's off topic, but since we're talking about it, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was released in theaters July 11th, 2003, and was released on VHS September of that same year. And look, it even had a variant where the cassette was white. And you can find one today for around $5. I'm just not entirely sure why people hate on this movie so much. It wasn't a bad watch. Now, I'm not saying this hypothetical League of Extraordinary Gentlemen made up of 80s comedic icons would be any way effective in fighting the forces of evil, but it sure would be fun. And that whole introduction just now was to say that Ernest P. Worrell is such an important cultural icon. In the 80s, this character was immensely popular, so much so that people still love him today. Even though there's been nothing in the forefront to really remind you of the Ernest character, Ernest P. Worrell just sticks with us through time. He is a beloved character, and the character of this lovable idiot whose idiosyncrasies are actually very complex was developed and portrayed by Jim Varney. And though he is mainly known for his work as Ernest P. Worrell, Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies movie, and the voice of Slinky Dog in Toy Story, Jim Varney actually does have a very expansive repertoire. He has done both television and movies before and after Ernest P. Worrell. He's done theater, he's done stand-up comedy. Jim Varney has done just way more stuff than you really thought he did. But the Ernest character definitely stood out from all of his different projects. People love this guy, and I'm one of them. I absolutely love Ernest P. Worrell. I have since I was a kid, and nothing is going to change that now. And if you don't like Ernest, I think you're watching the wrong show. Ernest P. Worrell was featured in countless commercials and numerous movies. And today, we're going to talk about all of it. Because, Vernon, it's today's episode, Exploring Ernest Tapes. Know what I mean? So what made the Ernest P. Worrell character so popular? And he was tremendously popular to the point where just putting his name in the movie title would make it sell. One reason he was so popular is because the character was relatable. And since he was relatable and likable, he would be perfect for commercials. And commercials is how Ernest P. Worrell got so popular. He became an advertising powerhouse. It all started in 1980, when Jim Varney paired up with the advertising agency and production team of Carton and Cherry. Prior to this, Jim Varney did have some TV spots. Like he had bit appearances in the 1978 spoof talk show Fernwood Tonight, and had a small spot on the television show and flop called Pink Lady and Jeff. So Jim Varney wasn't exactly unknown to TV land, but his career really took off when it came to the Ernest commercials. And these commercials were primarily advertising for stuff like dairies or gas companies or car dealerships, and they were just regional things too. He would do commercials for companies in Tennessee or companies in Virginia, Louisiana, Florida, so the advertising was localized. So he would do entire slews of commercials for these regions, and all these different television markets would pick it up, and that's how everyone started to know him. But he also did some national commercials too, like for Sprite and Mellow Yellow, and all this stuff started gaining major momentum, and people started to just really love Ernest P. Worrell, mainly because the concept of the commercial was so unique and funny. See, he would address the camera and pretend that it was his neighbor Vern, whom he would constantly annoy and seemingly just break into his house, because he was always wondering what Vern was up to. And of course, we as the viewer had the perspective of Vern. So it was a very clever way to do a commercial. And he would even do some PSA type commercials too, like don't drink and drive, don't smoke, and there was a couple of swimming safety advertisements. So Ernest P. Worrell as a spokesperson was a total hit, and these commercials were tremendously funny. And though he did countless numbers of commercials, he would mostly do the same bits for certain regions. Like he would do one for a dairy in Virginia, but then do the same bit for a dairy in Tennessee. And some of the car dealerships that he would advertise for would even use his face on the price tag of the car as a promotion gimmick. Using Ernest P. Worrell in marketing was a raging success, and the Ernest commercial became so popular that they compiled all the greatest hits and put them on a VHS and called it the Ernest Film Festival. And it was released in 1986, which contained 101 Ernest commercials plus bloopers. And I can't tell you how many times I rented this as a kid and even as an adult, until I was lucky enough to find an old rental copy at a thrift store for $0.25, which is great because this tape is actually pretty rare nowadays. And if you do manage to find one, it does go for a pretty steep price. $248. $248. And though the Ernest Film Festival was released on VHS in 1986, the commercials were featured on another VHS that was released in 1985, which was simply called Know What I Mean. And this video also contained the comedy special Hey Vern, It's My Family album, which were little vignettes about Ernest P. Worrell's relatives. And this is where you really got to see Jim Varney's acting chops on full display, where he portrayed his relatives as all different kinds of characters. And certainly the funniest one would be Lloyd Worrell, a character he would go on to revisit in Ernest Saves Christmas. And then these commercials would be repackaged again and released on VHS in 1987 in a video called Win $10,000. And this video actually featured a contest where you could win $10,000 if you wrote down on a postcard how many times Know What I Mean and Vern was mentioned in the duration of the video, and then mailed that postcard in. And if you were correct, you could win some big bucks. We're talking mucho dinero. Golly, Bob, howdy, Vern. And in the opening of the video, Ernest actually explains the rules to you. And much like the Ernest Film Festival VHS, both of these tapes are very hard to find nowadays. And again, if you do find them, they go for a pretty high price. I managed to get a really shitty copy of the Know What I Mean video for $20. But hey, I just had to have it. And the Win $10,000 VHS, I can't find that anywhere.
Out of stock.
Now, both the Ernest Film Festival and the Hey Vern, It's My Family album would go on to be re-released on VHS in 1992 by Good Times Home Video. And these are a little easier to find, but still, they're pretty pricey. But as you're going to find out later on in this episode, Ernest merchandise is pretty expensive. So anyways, that was just a small glimpse of Ernest P. Worrell on the small screen. But let's take a look and see what happened when Ernest P. Worrell arrived on the big screen. Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship will return after this. Yeehaw! Come on down to Cowboy Pork Chop, Choke and Puke Family Restaurants. Never mind the lawsuits, come on down and rustle you up some grub. Get our world-famous fried fart basket, only $5. Or lasso yourself an armpit and cheese submarine sandwich, only $5. Or try our homemade booger loaf platter, only $5. And try our new dessert menu. Get yourself a slice of loogie meringue pie, only $2. Or get yourself a big old used bathwater milkshake, only $3. And come in and try my new chocolate wonderful. I swear it's chocolate. You get a free Captain Adam toy with every Buckaroo Kids meal. And be sure to check out our new Little Buckaroo Playland, now snake-free. And get a Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship commemorative glass with the purchase of any entree. So come on down to Cowboy Pork Chop's Choke and Puke Family Restaurant. That's right on the corner of Route 25 and Kidderwith Boulevard, right beside Bill's Dirty Mattress Outlet. Yeehaw! Chocolate Wonderful is actually diarrhea. Cowboy Pork Chop not responsible for death or illness. If it is Buco, it is good. This is Buco Products. Buco Products makes long line of good things. We make the walkie-talkie toaster, which is a toaster that is also a walkie-talkie. We also make internal combustion engine that is also potato salad. And now we make new chicken-flavored adhesive tape at always low price. We are Buco Products. If it is Buco, it is good.
Buco Products.
Injured at work. Rough divorce. Was a loved one killed in a horrible circus accident? The law offices of Dillon and Triceratops. They'll fight for you. Call today. Get ready to confess to fun.
At the Spanish Inquisition Fun Park.
It's like medieval times, but only more accurate.
Because here, you won't be treated like royalty.
Because chances are,
You are a shit-covered peasant just like the rest of us.
ride the new Iron Maiden torture coaster.
Torture coaster.
Or ride the Rack and Roll and get stretched beyond belief.
Rock and roll.
And be sure to check out our new exciting Midway.
And get some funnel cake. So come have a good time at Spanish Inquisition Fun Park.
Confess to fun. Discount tickets available at participating Cowboy Pork Chops, Choke and Puke Family Restaurants.
Confess
To fun at the Spanish Inquisition Fun Park. Hey there, folks, it's me, Little Vino. And did you fuck your car up somehow? Maybe the engine's running rough because you haven't changed the oil in 3 goddamn years. Or maybe it's overheating because heaven forbid you check your antifreeze. Or maybe you need a new tire because you hit a curb because you were texting while you were driving. Like a fucking moron. Either way, your vehicle's fucked up, and I'm sure it's your fault. But I ain't here to judge. I'm just here to fix your car and take your money and serve you a nice cheesesteak while you wait. So come on down to Little Vino's Auto Repair and Cheesesteak Emporium. We do all sorts of automotive repair and got lots of cheesesteaks. And for a limited time only, we'll give you an oil change and refill your blinker fluid. Because a lot of you morons must be out of blinker fluid because you don't use your blinkers.
Use your fucking blinkers.
So come on down to Little Vino's Automotive Repair and Cheesesteak Emporium. Just because you're a fucking moron doesn't mean your taste buds are. Little Vino's Automotive Repair
And Cheesesteak Emporium.
We now return you to Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship. So by this time, we had already seen how well Jim Varney had done on home video and television, and it was time to test him on the big screen with the release
Of Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam.
Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam was released in theaters April 9th, 1986, and this thing was absolutely despised by critics, and it didn't do too well in the box office. It was definitely a low-budget project and could be considered a B-movie, but can't exactly be considered a Ernest movie, though the Ernest character does make a cameo at the end and does a pre-credit introduction. But this is certainly a Jim Varney movie, as it is another display of his supreme acting ability. Jim Varney portrays multiple characters in this, each one very different and each one pretty funny, including the auntie character, which would go on to be his funniest alter ego. And though at first this movie was loathed by the general public, it has gone on to achieve cult acclaim. The story centers around Dr. Otto, played by Jim Varney, and his invention, the Gloom Beam, which is an electromagnetic pulse device that would erase the world's financial records, sending the world into complete and utter chaos. And this movie might not have been high budget, but it still has some great visuals. Dr. Otto's costume is awesome, and the whole hand on the head thing is such a great gimmick. And Dr. Otto certainly is a forgotten about supervillain. And you got the robot, which is just a great design, simple but great. And I'm going to give a spoiler here and say that the good guys do not win in this movie. See, the Gloom Beam still ends up being initiated and wiping out all the world's financial records, bringing forth the apocalypse. Now, I have a theory that this film is actually the prequel to the Mad Max saga. Now, go with me here. See, the apocalypse was brought about, setting the stage for a dystopian society. And at the end of the movie, we see Ernest, who works at a gas station, where he explains that they're out of gas, meaning that gasoline is in short supply, which is pretty much the storyline to the second Mad Max film, The Road Warrior. So is Dr. Otto part of the Mad Max saga? Maybe, maybe not. Anyways, it would go on to be released on VHS by Know What I Mean home video, and then again in '92 by Good Time Times home video. And just like the other Ernest VHS I've talked about so far today, this one is also hard to find, and if you do find it, it's very pricey. Though Ernest was featured in it briefly, Dr. Otto is not an Ernest movie, but it is a Jim Varney movie, as I had mentioned earlier. And we were yet to see the full potential of Ernest P. Worrell on the big screen. You see, behind the scenes, Disney had started to notice how popular the Ernest P. Worrell character had become, and they couldn't help but see dollar signs and signed him up with Touchstone Pictures, a Disney Studios affiliate. And this union was solidified with the release of Ernest Goes to Camp, which opened in theaters May 22nd, 1987. And in this film, Ernest works at the summer camp, Camp Kikiki, as a janitor/maintenance man. And he has dreams of one day becoming a camp counselor. Camp Kikiki is chosen to be a part of a program that aims to help juvenile delinquents mold a healthy worldview. As the twig is bent, so groweth the tree. Okay, that line was taken from Ernest Saves Christmas, but the same principle applies. So anyways, a group of at-risk boys get sent to Camp Kikiki as part of this program. And to make a long story short, their original counselor had a mishap. And so they make Ernest a counselor for these boys. And that's when the shenanigans start. At first, they're hesitant, but eventually the boys start liking life there at Camp Kikiki. But there's trouble brewing. You see, Camp Kikiki is on the land that is the tribal ancestral home of Chief St. Cloud, a resident there at the camp. And the chief likes the camp there because he considers it a learning experience for the boys, and is a place to test the young braves, as his ancestors did. But the land is also mineral rich, and Crater Mining Corporation wants to take it over. And though Crater tried to use their lawyer to obtain the land legally, the chief wouldn't budge. But then Crater himself cons the chief into signing over the deed. By using Ernest as a translator, Crater swindles Ernest into convincing the chief to sign the deed away. And it would seem that Camp Kikiki is lost. But Ernest and the boys do not want to go down without a fight. And at first, he's unsuccessful. Yeah, he gets the shit kicked out of him, and you really hate to see it. Which then gives way to a musical sequence where a sad Ernest sings the song, Sure Am Glad It's Raining, which is a great song, and it's one of the reasons why this movie is so memorable. And in their second attempt to take the camp back, they engage in guerrilla warfare and domestic terrorism. And while they're doing all this, the chief's granddaughter, who is a nurse at the camp, decides to go do something rational instead by getting a judge to legally void out the deed that was signed over to Crater. But that doesn't happen until after Crater tries to murder Ernest right in front of Crater's own lawyer. It's a great movie, and you don't ask too many questions. This movie just has so much great stuff in it, like with the opening sequence with the toilet and the two cooks, Jake and Eddie, which these guys are just hilarious. So in short, Ernest P. Worrell on the big screen was a tremendous success, and it would go on to be released on VHS later on in 1987, and then again in 1991. And you can find the 1987 version today for around $20, and then the 1991 version for around $7. And so that was our first taste of Ernest on the big screen. But what would happen when the world would call upon him to save its most important holiday? And we would find out with the release of probably the most underrated Christmas movie of all time, Ernest Saves Christmas. In the movie, we discover that Santa Claus is searching for a replacement because the magic is dwindling and he needs to pass the torch. But the new Santa Claus has to have the right qualifications, and he believes he found the right man for the job with former kids show host Joe Carruthers. So Santa makes a trip down to Florida to recruit the new Santa Claus. He then runs into Ernest, who is a taxi cab driver, who picks up Santa Claus at the airport. But before any of that happens, there's a really funny scene in the beginning where Ernest is taking a guy to the airport, and Ernest is driving so crazy that the guy actually goes catatonic with fear. It's a great scene. So anyways, yeah, Ernest picks up Santa Claus in his cab and takes him to see Joe Carruthers. But along the way, Ernest and Santa have a chance encounter with a girl who calls herself Harmony Starr, which later we find out that she's a runaway and her real name's Pamela. So Ernest decides to help her out and give her a lift, and she just sort of ends up being stuck with him the whole movie. Now keep in mind that while all this is happening, Santa had told Ernest that he was Santa Claus. And of course, at first, Ernest doesn't believe him and just kind of thinks he's a nice old man with some mental problems. But in his heart, Ernest starts to believe him. And also keep in mind that Santa had brought his magic sack with him, but had forgotten about it and left it in the cab. Ernest finds it, and curiosity gets the better of him, and he looks inside, only to discover that the magic sack is real, and the man who had claimed to be Santa Claus is actually Santa Claus. And Ernest and Harmony go looking for Santa Claus to return the sack. Now there's an interesting observation here. There are two things about this movie that really make it stand out from any other Christmas movie. One, it challenges our Santa Claus mythos. You see, up until now, we all just thought Santa Claus was one magical dude who lived forever. And then we find out that it's actually been an assortment of Santa Clauses throughout time, and the magic just gets passed on. And number two being the sack of toys. We all just assume that the sack of toys is a literal and physical sack of toys. But here we find out that it's actually magic, and it actually makes it a little bit more believable. And so one of the reasons I say this is an underrated Christmas movie is that it changes how we think about Christmas. And yes, I know this is just an Ernest movie, but it does have a fascinating backstory, and it gives us its own interpretation of the Christmas mythos. So anyways, yes, Harmony Star and Ernest go looking for Santa, only to find out that Joe's agent had Santa Claus arrested because he thought he was a crazy vagabond. And so Ernest comes up with a plan to get Santa out of jail, where he disguises himself as a governor's associate named Astor Clement, and he convinces them to release Santa because he says that Santa is too crazy to be kept in a normal jail. And it works like a charm, and is another example of the fine acting of Jim Varney and his ability to switch from character to character. And we're about to find that out again when he tries to locate Joe by dressing up as the auntie character and tries to guilt the secretary of Joe's agent into telling him where Joe is. And once again, it works like a charm. And out of all of Jim Varney's characters, the auntie character is my favorite because it's just so damn convincing. I have two sons, and wouldn't you know it, the good one dies. Sorry, that's just my favorite line from this movie. And so they find out that Joe is on a movie set at a studio, but they need a pass to get in, and they don't have one, but Ernest has another great idea. And now he rehashes his Uncle Lloyd character that was from Hey Vern Is My Family album, and he effectively scares the security guard into letting them in. And so once again, the Ernest plan works like a charm. And so they meet up with Joe, and eventually they convince him to become the new Santa Claus. A lot of stuff happens. I'm sure you've seen the movie, but I'm just summing up. You see, there's so many great aspects to this film, one of which is the debut of the Chuck and Bobby characters in an Ernest movie. And in this movie, they work as cargo handlers at the airport where the reindeer come in. And these guys are just a great addition to this movie. And what's also interesting about the Chuck and Bobby characters is that they had their own commercials through Carden and Cherry, just like Ernest did. But these commercials were way more regional, so they weren't on the national scale. I mean, hey, I've been a fan all my life, and I just found this out about a year ago. And with this movie, you notice that they're starting to use the same actors throughout all the other Ernest movies. For example, the animal control officers that Chuck and Bobby call because of the reindeer, one of the officers is the same actor who portrayed Eddie in Ernest Goes to Camp. And the other officer was in Dr. Otto and also in Ernest Goes to Camp. You see, these movies were directed by John Cherry III of Carden and Cherry, and so they were all made with the same production team, much like the Coen brothers do with their films and Wes Anderson does with his films. I don't know, it's just something neat to notice. And plus, too, the actor that plays Joe's agent, you know, the guy that keeps calling Santa Claus Mr. Santos. Anyway, he was also in Monster Squad, which has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. But I thought it was worth a mention. Plus, I love that movie, and I'll be talking about it in a future episode. But anyways, Ernest Saves Christmas was released in theaters November 11th, 1988, and it would be released on VHS in 1989, and then again in 1996. And you can find either distribution today between $7 and $20. The Ernest movies are way easier to find than the earlier stuff. I suppose it's because the Ernest movies had greater distribution, since they had the backing of Disney and Touchstone Pictures. So anyways, Ernest Saves Christmas is a great movie, and it's also a great Christmas movie. And I say it's underrated for numerous reasons, mainly because when Christmas time comes around, this film is never on television. Sure, they'll play National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation until the cows come home, but this movie is nowhere to be found. And is this movie a sequel to Ernest Goes to Camp? No, it's not. You can't think of any of the Ernest movies as sequels. They're all their own thing. And some people even think that Dr. Otto is a prequel to Ernest Goes to Camp, which is pretty silly because if that were true, then that would mean that Ernest Goes to Camp takes place during the apocalypse. Plus, we all know that Dr. Otto is a prequel to Mad Max, Vern. Doesn't any news of the real world make it up to your tub? And so that brings us to the end of part 1 of exploring Ernest tapes, because I have so much more to cover. And when you do an episode about Jim Varney, it's so much fun You can't have just one. But before I go, I really got to talk about Ernest merchandise. There really hasn't been much Ernest merchandise through time, but back in his commercial days, there was some merchandise in the way of promotional gimmicks for the companies he'd advertise for. And since those companies were regional, so was this promotional stuff. So there wasn't a lot of it made, and it was distributed very sparsely. And most of this stuff was for contests or for giveaways, so it was rare back then, and it's even more rare today. And if you thought Ernest VHS was pricey, wait till you see what the buttons are going for. Here's one for $90 and another for $170. Keep in mind, this is a button, a little button, but there isn't many of these in existence. And here's a t-shirt for one of the companies he advertised for, Convenient Food Mart, going for $100. And here's one for Purity Dairy, going for $145. And here's an Ernest Halloween mask, going for $115. And you know it's used and had someone's big, fat, sweaty head in it. And here's a 1987 wall calendar, going for $200. I mean, these prices are pretty understandable, though. This stuff was rare, and if I had any of it, I wouldn't want to sell it. And look, they made an answering machine tape where Ernest would take your messages. And look, there was also an Ernest Goes to Camp read-along book and tape set where Ernest reads the story to you. It's tremendous. And as far as I know, this is the only merchandise from Ernest Goes to Camp. And all these high prices for Ernest merchandise just goes to show you that people still love Ernest. And I'm simply just not done talking about him. So be sure to tune in to Exploring Ernest Tapes Part 2, only on Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.